Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And thank you very much for being with us today. I'm very glad to have you all coming from the whole world for this session. So today we have participants coming from 13 universities from 9 countries. So thank you again. Thank you very much for being with us. My name is Gaëlle Le Goff, and I'm Director for International Affairs at École Polytechnique in Paris, in France. And on behalf of École Polytechnique, and also on behalf of our co-host university, University of Osaka in Japan, with which we had a great pleasure to work together for the organization of this event. I'm very delightful to welcome you on the third U7 Plus Intergenerational Roundtable. The subject of today will be science and technology innovation for a sustainable future. Before starting the roundtable, I would especially like to welcome the 2020 U7 Plus Worldwide Student Forum participants and give special thanks to the U7 Student Leaders Groups and the member of the U7 Plus Intergenerational Planning Committee. Here, I would like also to give a special thanks to our colleagues from Northwestern University, Anne Rice, and of course you also, Megan Ozarowski, for all your help and support to organize the event of today. Your help is really precious. So this event series would not have been possible without your efforts and the efforts of everyone I mentioned. Before starting, I also would like to remind the participants to add the name of their university to the name as displayed in the Zoom. It will make it easier for everybody to know from where you come from. So let's come to the subject. So today we will discuss what can be seen as a paradoxical situation and an opportunity emerging from the COVID-19 crisis. On one hand, the pandemic has revealed the need we face to harmonize our relation with the planet for a sustainable world. And on the other hand, the fact that the pandemic also accelerated the technological transition and had a huge impact on the organization of people's lives. So to discuss that topic and that subject, I will give the floor to my colleagues from University of Osaka and École Polytechnique. And I suggest we start with you, Professor Atsuru Morita from University of Osaka.
Thank you very much for this for organizing this wonderful event. I'm really glad to see everyone from all over the world in this wonderful occasion. I'm going to share my slide if possible. And thanks very much for the organizers for hard work to make this happen. I'm Atsuru Morita from Osaka University. I'm an anthropologist and science and technology scholar, and I'm going to talk briefly about 6 minutes about current challenges for science and technology in the age of climate change. So just let me briefly review the situation of climate change and so-called the Anthropocene situation. So humans have been, human activities have been a huge environmental impact in the past 50 years in so-called great acceleration. So as economies expand rapidly, as a consequence of modernization and development, human activities, particularly production, consumption, and waste generation, has become one of the great forces to shape the planetary environment. So so scientists, particularly Earth system scientists, have been warning that now human-induced material flow is one of the major forces to shape the planet. For example, global material flow of production and consumption has been transporting resources from sites of extraction in mostly global south to production centers in China and East Asia, and the destination consumption all over the world. This huge material flow generates huge CO2 emissions, And as well as this material flow often ended up in waste as the lack of recycling mechanism in current economy. So this, and this is one of the flip side of the climate crisis. So some tend to believe that climate crisis is kind of remediable by technological solutions such as renewable energy. But this material flow, which is global and systemic, it has no technical solution as so-called technological fix. So it really requires systemic change. And one of the key figures in this global force is infrastructures. Infrastructures are networked large-scale technological systems to facilitate circulation of resources and materials. So container ports and ships, highways, highway networks, railroads, electricity grid, and internet, these are all infrastructures. They are networked large-scale technical and organizational structures. And expansion of infrastructures and transformation of everyday life has been gone hand in hand in the past 50, 60 years. So as cheap energy available to almost all the households in developed world and increasingly in emerging and developing countries, our lifestyle has been transformed to energy intensive mass consumption lifestyles. And also it entails certain de-skilling effect. So we no longer need to fix things, repair things. We just buy things and just discard them when it is not used anymore. So in that sense, many of life skills like farming, tinkering, repairing, and so on have been lost. We are turned to consumers. So transition to sustainable economy requires not only new technologies, but also a transformation of everyday routines. It means that infrastructures have been deeply ingrained in the fabric of social life, and also infrastructures, functions, and forms have been shaping our lifestyles. So it's not just redesigning infrastructures that is required, but also we have to consider changing our everyday routine so that new technological systems can be conceivable. So one of these efforts that I want to point to today is a Fabcity Project led by the global community of Fab Labs all over the world. So I'm not sure if you know Fab Labs, but Fab Labs are part of Maker Movement. And Maker Movement is activism to gain control over means of production or nurturing technological capacity of citizens so that they can engage production, repairing, and many technical activities. So that their aim is the redistribution of skills, technologies to basically everyone, so that remaking country centralized infrastructures and production systems. So they want to turn back to pre-modern cities where many residents have artisanal or technical skills so that industry is less concentrated and everyone has more say on economic and industrial development. So that's a kind of utopian movement. And now this activism teamed up with 34 municipalities to create self-sustainable cities by the year 2054. I don't think I have a lot of time to talk about details, but I think Fabcity is interesting because it's a grassroots experiment for sustainability. And also it takes up this seemingly unrealistic idea of self-sufficient city as a kind of goal to question current mode of infrastructure development. So they try to make a production system more distributed. And also they claim to make things out of waste so that so it is part of circular economy movement. And also they are trying to build new infrastructure, which is circular. So they want to turn waste into raw material for manufacturing in Fab Labs, small citizen-led factories or workshops in cities. And also they want to monitor material flow so that it can be circular. So this is a kind of very interesting sort of utopian infrastructure project. And I'm interested in this, not because this, particularly because of their effort to question the current mode of infrastructures. So posing this self-sufficient city as a sort of idea, they are kind of questioning the taken for granted form of infrastructure which facilitate waste and climate change. So here are the questions I just want to ask. So what kind of technical and social transformations are necessary to change global material flow, which our system scientists have been warning as very damaging? And how does technological change relate with that of everyday life? And is there any widely applicable solution for the shift to circular infrastructures? Or are circular infrastructures essentially local and not generalizable? So if modernization is a kind of universe, if modernization has been offering a universal solution to practically everything, if circular infrastructure or sustainable shift is otherwise, might be otherwise. So it might be, there might not be a universalized solution, but it requires radical localization of everything. That is an interesting question from an anthropological viewpoint. And is the divide between passive citizens and expert who provide solutions part of the problem? This is what Fab Labs are asking. And I think this is also quite interesting to ask for university students like those participating in this, because obviously they are trying to be expert, and I'm also sort of expert, although I'm anthropologist. So this is a really interesting recursive question, I think. So thank you very much. That's it from me, and I think I have, yeah, thank you very much. And I passed it to Emil. Yes.
Should I just start now? Is that okay? Okay. Well, thank you for having me on this panel, and thanks to the organizers for their work in preparing this. And thank you all for making time in your day. I'm Emile Saint-Pierre. I'm a PhD student of Moita Sensei's at the Graduate School of Human Sciences at Osaka University. Apologies to visual people, I don't have any slides, so please just listen along. I approached the issue of technology in this time of the pandemic and climate change from my field research on issues of energy, renewable energy in northern Japan. It's been 10 years now since the 3/11 triple disaster, the earthquake, the meltdown, and the tsunami. And in those 10 years, renewable energy has expanded significantly in Japan and elsewhere, but so has the use of fossil fuels in Japan to make up for the gap left by nuclear power. Japan has recently joined other countries in their goal to become carbon neutral by 2050, but this alone leaves little idea for how life will be reorganized to meet this plan for decarbonization. And as we see during the pandemic, even many of us reducing our overall use of energy has done very little to dent global emissions. So Japan's environment ministry has put out a design for how to remake society into a sustainable system called the Chiiki Junkan Kyoseiken, which is already a mouthful in Japanese, but I would translate as Regional Circulation Coexistence Sphere. This plan backgrounds the environment and focuses mostly on material flows and economic activity. But it does, at least interestingly on paper, emphasize the need to promote diverse arrangements of Chisan Chisho, so local production and local use, according to regional specialization or characteristics. And the area that I do field work, Hokkaido, is known for its milk production. And this would mean continuing to build on biogas capacity to meet local energy needs. Interestingly, speaking to farmers, the advent of biogas here did not start from wanting more local development, but rather more on managing waste from expanding farms that created unbearable pollution in the 2000s. But then using the government subsidies that came out of the Fukushima disaster, biogas plants have expanded throughout Hokkaido. And the theme of energy independence has become an important issue following another earthquake in 2018 that caused a blackout here. Despite all of this activity, government direct investment in local plans for microgrids or other infrastructure remains a bit up in the air. So these sort of more autonomous and local efforts are what I am interested in focus on. Still, the industrial dairy farming in itself is hardly free of unsustainable inputs. But within this space, there are interesting relationships emerging where farmers become caretakers for methanogenic bacteria. So using cow dung to produce methane, which then generates heat and electricity. They experiment with the mix that they feed the bacteria. They monitor the flows of heat using their own senses and sensor technologies. And they use excess heat to create greenhouses. So these kinds of relations of heat are interesting because they overturn the focus that so far on electrification and the grid. And the role of male farmers in between these gendered worlds of care and technology are also kind of upheaved by this introduction of bacteria. So sharing heat in this sense becomes a kind of alternative multi-species infrastructure that, while not necessarily entirely sustainable, I think provides a way to feel energy that is often left too abstract or commodified in grid structures. So feeling and measuring flows of heat is also likely to become increasingly important as we inevitably feel the effects, the inevitable aspects of climate change, as they are, it seems now in the US, where power lines and cables are melting in the extreme heat. So what can we learn from this in attempting to figure out the role of technology, innovation, and universities? I think that, like the 3/11 triple disaster in Japan, the response to the pandemic crisis needs to be about the longer term of more than human well-being. The response is not just something that governments do, but the habits of people and systems. It is, for example, out of sheer determination that Dr. Kariko's research on the mRNA vaccines survived the university system. In the short term, I think that renewable energy can sometimes provide the funds that government are unwilling to give to lower order infrastructure in order to create some measure of independence, if equitably distributed. In the longer term, I think it becomes easier if broader alliances can continue to gain momentum around the materiality of the problems of things like energy and returning land to indigenous people, which would allow then to create different kinds of autonomies, different kinds of designs for what Arturo Escobar calls the pluriverse. So these kinds of partnerships, I think, will help in terms of universities also becoming owned by communities and letting their activities be opened up to different alliances. I think it seems a bit difficult to think about, as Bruno Latour has written, making things public when, as he says himself recently, we don't seem to live on the same planet, referring to climate change denialism and deadly inequality and rising fascist movements. But I think, nonetheless, that there is the premise in this idea of the pluriverse, finding ways to come together without necessarily needing to live on the same planet. And I think that heat as an extraterrestrial excessive force is good for thinking about the publics and alliances that it can create even across species. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Emile, and thank you, Professor Arturo Morita, for this great presentation from University of Osaka. Now we will have the pleasure to listen to our colleagues from École Polytechnique, and we can start with you, Thierry, so Professor Thierry Renard.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I would really like to thank everyone for being here today. And I'm very glad we get the chance to speak about these very important issues. I didn't prepare any slides, sorry. So you'll have to listen to me. I think we are at a very, and I think it's been underlined already by Emile, we are at a very, very grave time. And I'm not talking about the current pandemic, but I think, you know, if we think about the way things have evolved over the past decade, and Emile was mentioning quite of the significant issues there, we are already at a turning point. And in some countries, there is, in many countries, there is, and there has been a huge backlash against science and technology. And for many people nowadays, science, I mean technology, but even worse, science is the culprit. I mean, I'm not just going to talk about climate change deniers, but you can really see some reactions of people in some places, including my own country, where you almost have the impression we went back to the Middle Ages. And I think our responsibility in this respect is huge, because we have to make sure that this changes. Because if we don't, then we are going to go back straight to dark ages. And I don't think we can live on a different planet, unfortunately. I don't think there is this planet where I live with good technologies and well-educated people, and the rest of them, just live in dark ages. I mean, typically that just doesn't happen. Typically everybody goes to dark ages, unless you can be a buddy with Elon Musk and you actually fly out to Mars. So we're here, and we have to do something about it. And that is really important, because it means that we have a very big responsibility, us as universities and researchers, but also you as younger generation. The seeds have been out there for a while. I mean, we tend to think of all these events like the pandemic or global warming as being new, but the point is basically the seeds have been there because things have radically changed. And you can see these very amazing projects, such that the one Fabcity that Atsuro presented, and then there is what Emil said about being open. The point is we have now to completely rethink the way we envisaged our society and our economy. And it's really something we've been grappling with over the past decades, because there is some kind of thing which happens to be invisible and is really the elephant in the room. After the first industrial revolution, we switched to a model where everything was concentrated, because the technologies of production were concentrated. So basically you had to have big corporations, because design and creation was concentrated, and manufacturing had to be concentrated, and distribution had to be concentrated. I mean, education had to be concentrated. And that means that, you had to make big things, huge things, and target not a market for everyone, but basically you had to target basically the bulk of the market. And I think people did understand that you couldn't make, a hairdryer for everyone, a washing machine for everyone, or a car that would be fitted to your needs. But the advent of digital technologies has changed everything, because through digital technologies, everyone can design, create, replicate, distribute, and communicate. Whether we choose to or not, we can. And that completely changes everything. Everything in our economies, in our societies, are based on the assumption that, production is concentrated and has to belong to some corporations, or has to belong to the state. I mean, for example, what happened in the socialist countries during 70 years. But the point is that the key thing was concentration, corporation, organization. And now we're in a world where we've seen amazing things happening through technologies. I mean, who could have thought that we would be able to have a collaborative encyclopedia like Wikipedia? I mean, that really seems like a nonsense. And we've seen amazing things, good things and bad things happening with content. Now, of course, the interesting thing is that if you want to understand fake news, you can actually go back to a paper which I wrote with a colleague back in 2009, which explained why there would be fake news eventually. So the trends are known. Now, the issue is that we always thought, we're always surprised. But the reason we are surprised is that because we don't have the right tool. We miss the understanding of the technologies, and we miss the understanding of what the technology actually changed to the economy, to the society, and to the way we live. And I mean, we have our responsibility, because what we teach to students in management, I'm a management scholar, I teach innovation management, for many decades has been things where you would consider that the best for a company was to grow, to kill the competitors, to pressure your suppliers, to pressure your clients in order to make as much money as you could. So perhaps if you were studying economics or management, perhaps you would learn anything else. But if you were in a hard science or engineering school, the 3-4 courses you would have about management would be about that. Okay, so I'm going to create a startup, and basically I'm going to, what I'm going to do, I need to make the best product, but also I need to make sure that nobody can copy me, and I can get the big margins, so I get the investors, and so on and so forth. So we've all been framed into this thinking, and this thinking, it's not absurd. It didn't come out of nothing. It just that's the way it worked before, because of the concentration of means of production. But things have changed nowadays, and we need to make sure that the skills that are taught are different because everything changes, including the way we measure things, and that has to change as well. I mean, it's kind of ironic. About 10 years ago, we wrote an article with some colleagues, which was a bit of a joke for us. It was basically trying to look at the impact of the use of social media on the GDP. And what we came up as a result was that the more people use social media, the lower the GDP grows. So there were two possibilities. One of the possibilities was it distracts people. So basically people spend so much time on Facebook, Instagram, nowadays TikTok, that basically they don't work. Or the other possibility, which sounded a bit more interesting for us, that actually what happens through social media is not captured by this tool we have, which is the GDP. For something to be measured in GDP, somebody has to pay for it. Most of you are very young, so you can't remember how we used to consume content before. You had to pay for content. People were producing content. You had to buy journals and books and music. No, I'm not talking about subscription to music, like actual media. So your GDP was a good way to actually measure growth. And it's not anymore. It hasn't been for a while, yet we haven't come up with anything better, which is a problem. Why? Because at the same time, some people say, growth is bad. We need to kill growth and we need to go back to the state of nature. Well, no, this is not a problem. The problem is that the way we measure growth is not the right way. Okay, well, I'm not sure we should measure the number of tweets, because I'm not sure, everything would be valuable. But the point is basically, we don't have the right tools. And that's one of the things I'm doing in my research is actually trying to create the tools so that we understand in this digital world where things have to be open. We've seen amazing things. I mean, Atsuro was talking about fab cities. 3D printing has been out there for 30 years, over 30 years. It's always has been some fantastic technology, yet it hasn't really picked up. And it did pick up finally when it became more democratized. And it became more democratized where some crazy people, actually a professor from Bath University, decided to reverse engineer a 3D printer that costed over $35,000 and make sure that you could make the same thing with $350 of parts. And of course, he couldn't do it on his own. So he published what he did, he put it online, and everybody started to work on it. And that's the RepRap community. And if you have a 3D printer in your university nowadays, it's thanks to these guys. So you see, we have to rethink all the way we even organize innovation and production and distribution. This is something which is important. And just to finish, I think it's for that to happen, we need to have people with transversal knowledge. One of the key difficulties at the moment is that we have very good technical and engineering students who are very much in technology push. They're going to take the tech and they're going to try to push it. but because basically they lack the tools to understand, the business models and the ecosystem of business model. Typically, very often they will fail. At the same time, we have students coming from business schools, for example, and what they don't do technology push, they do business pull. So they're going to try to grab some tech and to package it in order basically to make a business. But the point is that whereas engineering students don't have this knowledge of the sort of like society and market aspect, business school students don't understand the technology. And that's a real issue, because if you don't understand the blockchain, then there is no way you can A, democratize it, B, there is no way you can avoid actually huge impact on global warming, because everybody is mining like crazy. So we are at a crossroad. We need people. I mean, you can't be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Of course, you need to have a specialization, but it's very important to have T-shaped people. So people who have very in-depth knowledge of a particular field, and basically they are actually able to actually create links with related subjects. I think this is one of the challenges that await us. The other challenge is that I don't think you can stop learning, and neither should you. Again, back in the days, you had to learn through books and through physical classes, and you couldn't communicate stuff you'd learned at work because there was no way. I mean, what would you do? Sit and just write a book about, what's the correct way of managing a company or technology and publish it? Nobody will read it. So nowadays, there is no reason to stop learning. And that's why our next challenge is to have lifelong learning. And I'll stop here because I think I probably exceeded the time very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thierry. That was really inspiring. Thank you. And I know you could tell a lot more, but we need to give the floor to Cheyenne Khan, so a student from École Polytechnique and your former student as well.
Okay. Can you all see my screen? I hope you can.
That's perfect, Cheyenne.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being part of the event. My name is Cheyenne. I'm a former student of École Polytechnique. I recently graduated about 6-7 months ago. I'm currently working as an IT consultant at a company here in France. And I'm also I have the pleasure to be a part of the U7 student board, which brought to you with the Northwestern, the Intergenerational Roundtables. So I'm going to echo a lot of what Thierry was saying, and how students and how people are going to play an impactful role in the years to come. So as an IT consultant, we are working with new technologies every single day, and the way the change has happened in the past year, the implication that it has had on the demand of technology and the way we're using it, as well as for us to start thinking about social issues, is very pertinent because, in my opinion, and I think we can all agree that they're starting to go hand in hand. So there was this need in the past years and since the Industrial Revolution to make sure that we have the newest technologies, the newest, the fast-moving efficiency industries, and to be able to get growth at a very exponential way. But now the thinking has changed, in the sense that now there's social issues that are being implicated. So how does this impact human rights? How does this impact our environment? And technology, and there's a book that I was reading of Bill Gates, and of course there's criticism about his book and how well it is and all that. But the one thing that clearly stood out is that we all say that technology is a solution, but we also have to consider that it's also part of the problem. And that we are moving at such a fast pace that we are forgetting about the social implications technology can have. So in the past year, as we've all seen, communication has drastically and completely changed. We wish to be with each other here to do this event in live, but physical contact has been reduced over the past year. You see the new demand of Zoom and Teams and all these others that are coming about and bridging that gap for not only for personal conversations, but in the professional context as well. Environmental topics has been a big thing. So if you just look at the amount of traveling that has reduced, I was reading this article, Emirates, that's an airline of the UAE, they lost 88% of their business. And also look at that, if you take that comparison within in environmental terms, overall in 2020, we only reduced emissions by 6.5%. And if you see in practicality what that means, it's really not that much. So that requires us to rethink the way we're using our resources. And every year, as we see, every year there's this on Earth Day that they say that we have already used our resources in August for the whole year, for the natural resources that we have. Financial institutions, that's one of the big things. Banks, especially in France, that were really full on oil and gas and everything that really had a negative impact on the environment. There were like billion-dollar projects in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. But banks have completely shifted their way of thinking, and they're re-strategizing the whole profit-only strategy. And that has completely shifted the way their mindset is, and they're now including the social implications of that. And many more. This doesn't necessarily have to be in engineering aspects or in mathematics or the sciences, but even if you're in a different major, even art has had a major impact. There is AR, VR that has taken off. There's digital painting nowadays. So everything has shifted towards technology. But again, the social implications is something that we need to think about. And for me, the starting point is students. And while a student cannot learn everything, and they're not necessarily 100% prepared for the real life applications, because again, you learn as you go. But maybe there are certain things that we can do to help that. And in this slide, I mentioned 4 points that I think are really important to think about. Is that first of all, the technological basis. And Thierry mentioned that we need to understand what the technology is. We're giving out these buzzwords like AI and IoT and blockchain, etc. But what do we know behind that? And that's something we need to have and build a base upon. And if universities are there to provide some basic technological courses, regardless of your major, to understand what that means at the back end and how that maybe impact to your domain, I think it could be a really interesting way of us knowing and us contributing. The startup culture. So one of the examples I gave in this is we have a center here called Drahi at Polytechnique, where the startup culture is massive, and there's students coming up with ideas, and that's where the growth is. Students from universities are coming up with incredible new ideas from all over domains, and especially now in sustainability and tech, and that merge together, because that's become an implication not only for big companies that are looking to buy such startups, but for startups that want to sustain according to regulations, etc. So the idea for students to be provided resources so that these innovations can come about and we can continue that level of growth in the right direction, not only for the demand of technology, but also in the social impact it could have. Then sustainability thinking. We've used sustainability as a buzzword over the past many years, and ultimately it's to understand what is behind. We use that, this technology is bad and traveling is bad and etc. But the idea is for us to even make a small move to make sure that we are even contributing. Just recycling, basic recycling could be one of the ways that you contribute. And educating students on that is in importance of its application is really important, because tomorrow these are the people that are going to be making the decisions, the global leaders of tomorrow. And last but not least, theoretical versus practical. When I was in engineering school about 4 or 5 years ago, we focused on a lot of the theoretical parts more than the practicality of things. And when you start getting to work, it takes some time to kick off. And more practical training, more examples. And Polytechnique, we do have a lot of that, and we're pushing that strongly to make sure that what you have at the university, you get the same taste of it when you're working. It's just that you have to build up. And that is really important so that students really understand how decisions can be made, how real life applications work, and how action decisions are made when they leave, and how these big companies are really taking that trajectory. So overall, COVID has really reinforced, and I mentioned at the top, it's a twofold manner. It's innovating technological culture, which is already there, but it's also rethinking social implications. And COVID has reinforced us to be more innovative, but in a way that manages and helps us to contribute positively to our ecosystem and our society. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shayan. Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. So now this first part is finished. So we will be moving into the breakout sessions. Each room will have a facilitator that will help guide you through the discussion questions. So the breakout discussion will last for 30 minutes. When there are 5 minutes remaining, Megan will send you a message as a reminder to add any final thoughts. Then you will be automatically sent back to the main room when time is up. So I think now we can change and we can go to the breakout sessions. Thank you all. So we are back to the plenary discussion, and we'll have the chance to listen to the summaries of the 5 groups because today we had the chance to have 5 groups to discuss about the topic on science and technology. So I'm not sure if I have the list of all the volunteers. Great, thank you. So we'll start with somebody from the University of Ottawa, Valeria. So who will do the first summary, and I would like just to remind you, you have 2 minutes so to introduce your summary, Valeria.
Okay, thank you. So we had a very interesting discussion in our group. As always, it would be nice to discuss for longer because there's so much to talk about. But essentially, we've kind of focused on question number 3 and discussed the importance of education and perhaps more tangibly, the importance of including courses in all fields of study to help basically provide a baseline knowledge to all students. On the other hand, we did discuss sort of the limitations within the kind of relatively rigid university structure and how there's also an importance for students and faculty to get involved outside of the university as well. And in our group, we were very lucky as well to have one of the presenters who was talking about the Fab Lab and the importance of just having a solution-based approach, but also focusing on small things because climate change is a very big and somewhat daunting, global issue, and that perhaps a good place to start is just small steps towards the bigger solutions. So those were kind of the main things that we discussed, kind of the pros of education as well as kind of the limitations of the structure and the importance to sort of get out there in the community and try to make change that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria, for this great summary. So now we'll listen to the second group with Shivona from Bocconi University. So Shivona, would you like to?
Sure, thanks.
Your summary.
Yeah, so we had an interesting group. We had 2 students that are actually studying constitutional law in Japan and then contrast in Italy. And so we focused a little bit on that kind of topic and the question of the type of society we'd like to have. And we began with the question about private property and individualism. So, if that's how the law is set up in our society is very individualistic, then how can we have a very sustainable society in the future? So is it sharing economies that will be the main focus? Will we shift to, no more owning properties, cars, big houses, etc., shifting away from this? Or shall we embrace having these things, but just make them, better? And how can we have that in the legal matters? What about the digital divide? Is everyone included in these kind of things? And we kind of ended it there with the word inclusion, thinking not only about the developed world that most of us come from, but also the role that we'll have in third world countries, that it's not only about big houses, but basic infrastructures. So that's, I think, sums it up really well. So thanks.
Great, Shirona, in such a short time, thank you. So the next group is led by Arjun from Georgetown University. So Arjun, it's up to you now.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So we had a pretty interesting discussion. And when we talk about science and tech, it wasn't just the big fancy machines and the semiconductors, but we ended up looking at nature, right? Both agrarian practices and how they fit into broader systems like crop insurance and climate smart agrarian practices in Kenya. We contrasted that with a discussion about solutions in Hokkaido, which we heard in the presentation. So a big question on local versus global versus national solutions came up, and what we can all learn from one another. We looked at ideas of what is tech? Tech as, tech is making things simple and the role that that can play in sustainability. We looked at the role of the public in citizen science and who actually practices science in an era of increasing geopolitical tensions. Is it just scientists in labs in countries which may not be getting along, or is it more people as well? And we looked at the role of the internet. We looked at some of the COVID-19 vaccination technologies and how they have spread or not spread. And we also looked then at the role of elites, right? Because people who practice science are often members of an elite. So how can they better communicate what they find? How can they include more people within the work on science and technology? Because I think the consensus we arrived at it wasn't just the technology, but it's the systems in which the technology operates that really makes a difference. And finally, we spoke about the role of education. So right from the primary and secondary school level, right through university, the role that science and tech and environmentally friendly practices can play. We spoke about all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. Thank you very much. So very interesting as the previous groups. Now let's go with the group where I was. So with Justin.
Hi. So we talked about a lot of things. I'm sure my group would say we talked about a lot of things, but three main groups that I noticed, three main threads I noticed were technology as and its role in advancing capitalism, and looking at really like the neutrality or the lack of neutrality of this new era of technologies, digital technologies that Professor Thierry talked about. And then we talked about like the role of like technology in trying to solve or trying to resolve history, and how perhaps the systems that we've built with technology aren't really able to be dismantled, or are they? And lastly, and in that sense, we talked about the Unabomber Manifesto and Jacques Ellul, who's a French Catholic thinker. And then lastly, we talked about like what the cost of technology. There are certainly costs. How are those offloaded, and how those offloaded onto the poor and LADCs, lesser economically developed countries.
Great, thank you. So I forgot to mention, so Justin is from Georgetown University as well. Yeah, thank you. And now the last group, I think, with Marco, so from University of Mannheim. So Marco.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of things have been said, but we had a really lovely discussion, starting based on that we need more and more funding to get into science. We saw like huge bills in the US talking about science at the moment, but it's still not enough. What was one major point for the first question especially was we were talking a lot about recycling and the role of science towards recycling and regarding recycling, that we need more systems, especially in developing countries, that it's not sufficient enough in different countries and different aspects. The long-term impact and renewable impact of that we also should use what we call to get more away from lazy efficiency. So we use like kind of like burning coal and regenerating heat and energy, then using like the overarching heat more regarding recycling, for example, as well. we're talking about some societal impacts as well, so that we need to talk about labor values or labor change especially as well. So if we go back to first question, of course, we can talk about the rise of electrification. Is it for fuel, or is it for other things? But it's also, if we look at lithium mining, we have really a lot of problems we're getting into in the next years. With labor problems, we need to change ethical values about that for sure, going more into society of zero waste values. Also have to think about what and who is causing climate change. So people, everybody's causing climate change, or is it more of the biggest corporation? And also think about passive infrastructure in that sense. And also, to sum it up at the end, we also talked about a bit of the role of the media and social media especially, but also partisan media. We really have to think about that, because a lot of people are not giving science the big stage as it deserves, and making more of political issues about that. So media is also something, has to play a role if we talk about scientific value and scientific discussion. We don't have to underestimate that.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you a lot. So very, very interesting too. So, so you represented the last group. So we don't have other presentation. So I really would like to thank you all for your participations today. I really think this meeting today was really a success. And not only because we have point of view from people coming from the whole world, but I think also the other interesting point is that today we have people, students, who are from humanities specializations or from science and technologies. We have engineers, scientists. We really have people from different backgrounds. It really makes the discussion richer, I think. And not only because we have people from Asia, Africa, Europe, or America. So that was really interesting. And so this is not the end today. If you want to, we will share the recording of the event and also the write-up, so in the coming weeks. So if you want to, and also I hope you will keep in touch together. I know in my group, I felt so good when I saw that one student exchanged an email address with another student just to continue the discussion after. So I hope this is something you will do. I really would like to thank the team from Northwestern University again, because working with you is just amazing, and you're really a great team. Thank you a lot. And also I would like to thank, of course, all the students from the U7 Student Leaders Board for convening this event series. Thank you a lot. All students are invited to connect with the U7 Student Leaders Board to learn more about their group and how to get involved. So please, if you're interested, you can email directly to the email address, so u7organizer@gmail.com. And for the next step, so we really hope that the students will be, from today, you will be interested in joining the 2021 U7 Worldwide Student Forum, which is organized by the University College of London this summer. The details will be available on the U7 website, and you can also contact your university presidential delegate. And again, this is a very important event, so I really do hope the students here will be involved and interested. So that's all for me today. So my last word would be for you. So thank you all, and I hope we can meet very soon. Goodbye.
Again. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.